Welcome, everyone. Um, I am Rebecca Cotto, Director of Racial and Social Justice for YWCA Delaware, and I am here tonight with three distinguished guests, and we are going to have a conversation about reparations. And so I really could go through their entire list of accomplishments, but what I would prefer to have them all do is just kind of introduce themselves and tell you what they want about them instead of me reading their bios. So, hey, Shannon, even though that wasn't to me. So why don't we start ladies first? Javon, go ahead and introduce.
Darn, I was hoping someone else would go first so I could see what they tell me about themselves. But I'm Javon Rich. I'm the policy advocate with the ACLU of Delaware. I am a social worker, go social work. So I have a wide background in providing services to people who, need it the most.
Awesome, thank you. Eugene?
Eugene Young with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, civil rights organization, been here in Wilmington for 21 years. And I am co-founder of Network Delaware.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Logan.
Thanks for having me, Becca. Logan Herring, CEO of what we call the Work Group, the Warehouse, Reach Riverside, and Kingswood Community Center, leading a $250 million holistic revitalization of the Riverside neighborhood. So glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you all for being here. I got some comments when we first decided to do this, and so I thought, wow, even more interesting. Let's definitely do it. So when it comes to reparations, I don't want to make the assumption that all of you agree in reparations, but I'm going to ask each of you if you think in some way, shape, or form that reparations should occur. And before we do that, I do want to acknowledge we are going to talk about tonight just reparations for the Black community. We are not negating the fact that there's never been enough reparations, nor could there be for Native Americans either. That's just not going to be our concentrated conversation tonight, unless you guys have something specific to give to that. That wasn't going to be our, but we are not ignoring the fact that those are absolutely necessary and that conversation needs to happen too. So, when do you guys want to go? Eugene, you're the one off the mic, so you go first.
Okay, so what was the question? Say it one more time. Sorry. Because I started, I was really thinking about what you just said. So I'll touch what you just said and then go to that.
Do you think reparations in some shape or form should occur?
Oh God, yes. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. But I think reparations is something that is certainly needed to address some of the issues that we have. A large issue that we have within, in particular, the Black community, around the lack of wealth and this large racial wealth gap that we have. When we have conversations about just the need for reparations, it touches on a variety of issues, right? So reparations deals with the acknowledgement of it, the constitution of the repairing aspect of it, and then how do you kind of deal with these these long-standing issues that have occurred? So all that to say, we're in a time period right now. I bring up a study or an article from Forbes magazine. If you could Google it if you care, it's Forbes magazine, September 11, 2017, Black and Latino wealth. And it shows that the Black wealth will be zero by 2053. And this is before COVID-19. And it shows how there's this long-standing lack of wealth within the Black community. And the wealth can go, this lack of wealth can go back to 1619 when Blacks were brought here as slaves, up until slavery, the end of slavery, Jim Crow, as Cornel West would say, and also mass incarceration. There's a variety of things in between, but I don't want to belabor the point. I'm sure we'll get into it later, but I think that's kind of the nexus of is repairing for the damage that has been done, and a form of recompense and moving forward.
I agree exactly with Eugene's sentiment. So reparations, even in its definition, are actions that are taken to make amends for wrong or injury. So in this instance, we're talking about the wrong of slavery and the injury that resulted from it. And we can talk about that a little bit later. You know, as far as reparations, are we necessarily addressing people who are impacted by slavery alone, or the vestiges of slavery, or the evolution of slavery as time has moved on? So again, you know, reparations is a way to acknowledge a wrongdoing, is a way to make amends. And also, typically, when the government does this, in a sense, it's a way to provide closure to that part of history.
Yes, 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 and yes. And I only speak briefly about it because I know we'll get more into it. But I think reparations is not only needed, it's a necessity. And it's interesting because I think Asheville, North Carolina passed, their city council passed the reparations legislation maybe 6 months ago, 7 months ago. And I've been talking with some of the folks down there, but not surprising, they have yet to move on it. And there were a lot of creative ways that, or at least concepts that they came up, investing in Black businesses, you know, helping folks put money down on housing, a lot of different interesting ways that it's not just the direct cash, and I'll get into that later as well. But they have yet to move on it. And I think the one thing that we have to be cognizant of when we talk about any action such as reparations or anything that supports the Black community, we have to call it out that things move a lot quicker when we're not talking about a specific race. When we look at how we compare the opioid epidemic to what happened with the crack epidemic and how this country treated it. When we look at corporate buyout or corporate bailouts versus how long it takes to get things passed for the, you know, regular working people. When it comes to the Black race, political forces tend to move a little bit slower. I'm gonna say a little bit is an understatement. Slower when it comes to addressing the needs of the Black community, although the Black community has faced more oppression than any other community. So, Becca, I appreciate you clarifying when you made the initial statement about we're only talking about the Black community right now, because with the work that I do, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, I say, no, let's call that out explicitly. Let's say, you know, let's start with race, because those behaviors of discrimination started with race, and then it's been a learned behavior that's been passed on to sexual preference and disabilities, and the list goes on and on. So we need to be real explicit about it being about race, and then also the lack of political will when it comes to doing things needed to address the Black community and the Black populations and what is essentially needed to provide the ultimate equity. Becca, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
My husband would love to have control of that button, I tell you. Yeah, I agree with everything you all just said, so this should be kind of interesting. But to your point, Logan, I want to say, like, not only do we move really slowly, we seem to move backwards sometimes. And so, you know, I know we're gonna get more into that and what it looks like now, because the disparity is even greater now than it was 50 some years ago. So the wealth disparity. So there's all different types of things that this could look like, right? So there's always the thought instantaneously that it should just be a cash payment, right? And so that is one option. And then there are tons of other options. So I would, we're just going to go in the same order, or you guys, if you want to back each other up, you can, meaning if you want to jump in, you know, that kind of thing. Just kind of tell me what, in your mind, Eugene, what does that look like in an actual picture, daily, everyday life, real thing?
So I mean, I look at this as very much a cash payment. There are many academics, many people that have, like, this is like, let's even backtrack, like the idea of reparations is not new, right? is something that's been actively pushed for a while now. You could go back to Randall Robinson's book, The Debt. You can also find it with the National Coalition. It's called NCOBRA, National Coalition of, I have it around here, Black Reparations in America. And you even have today with the American Descendants of Slavery, right? So there's always been groups that have really fought around these issues of reparations. So with that, we have to recognize, you all see.
Hey, Madison.
Yes, yes. All right, say a quick hi and then go take a
Hi,
break.
Madison.
See Uncle
This is the
Logan?
world. This is the world we live in.
Yes, I know. Here's
Hey,
Mason. Say hi to Uncle
Mason.
Logan and go ahead.
All right, get
All
off
right.
the screen. We
Get
got work
off
to
the
do.
screen. All right, thank you. So one of the things, can you go with there, Mother, please? Thank you. Go ahead, Mercy. Thank you. All right, sorry about that. So
That's
one of the
okay.
things that, so there have been groups that have been focused on this for a long time. And the fact of the matter is, the wealth positioning of Black Americans has, it's not something that I think that just giving an institution or just saying, hey, making sure everyone has a $15 minimum wage or everyone has healthcare or because all these are many of the conversations that come up, that this will be what will just close the wealth gap and make things the way they are, the way they should be. I argue, and many scholars will argue, if you really want to make a change, you have to give specific cash payments for people who have suffered, who are in the lineage of those that have suffered, right? So I'll give an example. Dr. Sandy Darity from Duke, the Samuel Du Bois Cook Scholar, there oftentimes brings up his ideal is, if you really, in regards to reparations, it should be given to those who can trace their lineage back to slavery. Most people through Ancestry.com, if you can chase your family history back to the 1800s, you could pretty much, like, I can find both on my maternal and my paternal side, both slavery, both of my ancestors being on both sides being enslaved. So it's fairly easy to find out. And I think for that, generations that have come after and have lived in the shoes. And I use that because that is something that was oftentimes said during when reparations were given to the Jewish men and women who were descendants of some of the ancestors that were killed during the Holocaust. So I think that same kind of situation kind of applies. Living in the shoes, because you can see with the wealth positioning of the Black community of where we are, how we have gotten here. So I'm trying to temper myself so I don't talk too long. So I'll leave it.
Okay, can I piggyback on Eugene?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Sorry, Javon, if I jump in, but I'm kind of fired up right now, so you're gonna have to bear with me. So I hear the conversation, I hear the argument of, tracing back the lineage to slavery. Like, to me, it's a yes and, but I don't even think that's necessary. Like, there should be reparations for just being Black in America. And I try to ground it in the work that I do so I can provide a little bit of context so people just think I'm not like speaking out of my behind. But I'll just ground it in Riverside. So no surprise, I work in the Riverside neighborhood where it is majority, almost all Black neighborhood, low income, public housing community, which in the 1950s was built for white veterans coming back from World War II. So let me just state that. Like, there were no Black people living in the public housing of Riverside to begin with. Then we had this thing called housing segregation and redlining that took place that intentionally provided $120 billion in mortgages to the white population. Less than 2% were available to people of color. So whites got the ability to purchase homes in the suburbs, build home equity, be able to have generational health and wealth by building equity through their home. And Blacks were relegated to neighborhoods like Riverside. Then we pile on the criminal justice issue around the crack epidemic, where 1 in 4 African-American males between ages of 20 and 29 were in prison or on parole. Then we add on public housing policies on top of that that says if you come from prison, you can't live in public housing. And where we are today in Riverside is 87% of the households are led by single women. So when you have, the quote unquote, we need to have a village to raise a child, but everybody is struggling, how do you have a village? And then why do we see our teens out here killing each other? Because we don't have that strong support system, because our families have been dealing with stress. So they don't stay together. They don't see the value in a two-parent household because they never had one, because the parents have been locked up or the father's been locked up and then can't even come into the household anymore. So you have all of this stuff piled on top, the oppression, the barriers on top of one another. And that's why our mission at Reach Riverside is to eliminate the barriers of structural racism. So it's funny because a couple of years ago, Wells Fargo sent me to Boston College to get a certificate in nonprofit leadership. And in the 5 days, at the end of the 5 days, we were to participate in this mock trial of going to like a large affluent donor's house and trying to convince them to provide us with funding for our organization. So at that point, I was exhausted by the end of the week. I went and grabbed like 4 people in the class with me. I said, yo, we're gonna start a revolution. You're in this city across the country, you're in this city, you're in this city. Let's do something called reparations, where we do an experiment and we give out cash for a certain period of time to families and see how much better they are in a situation. Now it's something that you hear about called universal basic income. I took that concept, and when the pandemic hit, I did the same thing for Riverside. And we raised money. We raised $500,000 in a few months. We handed out $250 to every single family, and we did it for 5 months because we were so successful in fundraising. We distributed Chromebooks, over 400 Chromebooks, 15,000 meals, got some people signed up for the census. What the research I've been doing, and then I'll shut up because I get like Eugene. No wonder we've been best friends since the age of like 13 or 14. But what I've been researching is that when you provide that cash without any strings attached, as we did, you reduce stress. You give people the flexibility that if they need their tire fixed, that they can go do that. You're giving them the ability to keep their job so they don't have to call out. They can provide money to get childcare. They can buy food, healthy food, so their family's healthier. They can get to and from the doctors. Like 91%, we did a survey, 91% of the people we distributed the money to said they were using the money to pay bills, get food, like the basic needs. So with all due respect, we can trace it back to race, we can trace it back to slavery, but we can just say just growing up Black in America has enough barriers as it is. We all deserve reparations. Sorry,
Yeah.
Javon.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Oh, I knew your internet was going to be sketchy.
I'm like, okay, I'll see that. That's good. I know that, but am I back?
You're back.
Is my
Maybe
internet
turn
back?
your camera off when you're talking, but keep it on when you're not, because I love
Oh,
seeing it.
sounds good. Okay. Sounds good. So what I'm hearing from both Logan and Eugene is this concept of who would qualify for reparations, right? So some folks believe that direct descendants of enslaved people should qualify for reparations alone, while others also kind of bring up the issue of, well, if you talk about the impact of slavery in its long term, many Black people are experiencing some of the issues that pretty much started in slavery. So some of the things that Logan mentioned about redlining, other issues, I say like slavery evolved into systematic racism that impacted Black people. So the Black and white wealth gap, access to education, being paid fair wages, Black people, regardless of if they can trace their lineage back to slavery, are being impacted by it. So when it comes to reparation legislation, one thing that should be considered is who is the target of that legislation. But what I'm seeing is when there is reparations legislation, the language that they are using is, this is what Black people or descendants of slaves have experienced after slavery, right? So are we paying out reparations for the act of slavery alone, and the way that Japanese Americans survivors were paid for surviving internment and the treatment during World War II alone? Or are we talking about the impact of it over 150, 200 years? So that's, something to consider. And I think direct payment is an important aspect of it. But when you talk about the systematic issues, it won't necessarily get to that root cause with financial payments alone. So it could be financial payments, but it could also include financial payments and a number of other allocations of funds. So like for education, subsidizing healthcare. I saw Ice Cube was in hot water, during the election season, but he said Black people shouldn't pay taxes for 10 years, right? So is that a method of, or an allocation of reparations, tax cuts, and also pardons for people targeted by the war on drugs? So when Japanese Americans received checks for being survivors of internment camps, they also received pardons for being arrested based on discrimination, right? And so pardoning people targeted by the war on drugs and other policies that negatively impacted Black people is another aspect of reparations, I would say.
Interesting, Javon. So you're saying it's not necessarily an either or, and I think Logan is going to unmute himself in a second. But that's really interesting because I've always thought of it as one or the other. But you're absolutely right, because just giving people money is not really going to get to the systemic issues, right? But it may take some of the stress off, like Logan said. They may be able to enjoy life a little bit more and breathe just a little bit easier, have fresh fruits and vegetables. But there's still all these systemic issues. Logan, do you want to go ahead, or Eugene, one of you guys? I know one of you had something to say.
So I was just going to say something really quick. So I think it's both and, right? So I think it should be cash payments, and I also think, going back to what Javon said about for many of the Japanese Americans, making sure their records, expunging certain records or pardoning certain records, things of that. I think that I especially think about that with the marijuana drug laws, right, that we've had over the years, and how probably within the next 2, 3, 4, 1 year, marijuana will probably be legal, even probably possibly within our state. So I think it's both and, but I also think that, I think specificity is key, because here's the thing. Here's the thing that I think we need to kind of to understand, is the fact that I'm not saying this to be exclusive, right? But I'm also want to be targeted. So from the standpoint of this, so like there's a group, I'll give an example. Last year I was in Nairobi, Kenya, doing some work. I had the fortunate opportunity to go out there. I believe that, after going out there, I certainly believe that there is certainly a justice claim to England for the pillaging and the plunder that is going on, that has happened during colonization, right? And so I think that they have a justice claim. Just the same way as many of our Caribbean countries, and those who come from many of these Caribbean countries, I think they have a justice claim. And you know what? They understand that they have a justice claim because there's actually a group called CARICOM that specifically is fighting for reparations for many of these different islands, to make sure that they end up getting reparations for, Jamaicans going back to England, for Haiti going back to France, for all the pillage that France did after Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, right? So we have to. So only reason why I say this, I think that the best way to is target as possible. If you're able to be as specific as possible, and then it also helps out other nations around the globe, because as we're able to be many of the first in a sense of being able to give reparations, I think it's a domino effect. And then lastly, I would say this: there's the reason why you also have to be kind of mindful of it is because, before 1965, there was immigration. It was the Immigration Act of 1965. I forget the name of it. It really transformed immigration here in our country, and what it is, and what we see now today. And the reason why I bring it up is because prior to that, it was primarily Black, white, right? And so you can easily, and the only reason why I say this is where you can easily, like as Logan brings up the people from over Riverside, most of the people that lived over Riverside were descendants of slaves, essentially, because they lived, even if to be here in Riverside during those certain years, like my mom, Logan's mom, like our family members who are from this area, like you can easily track that lineage. And so that's the only reason why I'm using specificity in that sense, because it's you can track one's lineage. You can also, like, and I kind of go back to some of the academics who have brought this up. They say, A, you should be able to track one's lineage. B, you should also make sure that someone says Black on their, has identified as Black within the last 15 years. So that gives, so not only can you track your lineage, because there may be someone who has a $200,000 payments coming out. Someone may say, well, I'm Black. So, things of that nature occur. So it provides, allows for specificity, and also targets those who have, because it's the calcification of this constant deterioration of wealth over time, right? It goes back to the first opportunity where Blacks were able to have an opportunity was the Special Order 15, which was done by the Secretary of War at the time, Stanton, and Sherman, General William Tecumseh Sherman. They made Special Order 15 at the time that allowed, that said, Blacks in this country, you're going to get 400, you're going to get 400,000, I wouldn't say miles worth of land that is pretty much between North Carolina, South Carolina, and some of Florida. And that was going to be 48, that was where 40 acres and a mule came from. What happened was, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by that wannabe actor on that one night, a couple days later, who becomes president? Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson from Tennessee. He's totally opposite of Lincoln. So elections do matter, right? And who you pick as vice president matters. He, instead of having the former Confederate officers and those who were fighting for the Confederacy have their lands turned over to these slaves, he ends up giving it back to the Confederates, the Confederate fighters. So this begins like the claim that is what we're talking about today. And you could take from there to the Freedmen's Bureau, all these different areas that lead us in today. And so that's why I'm saying there needs to be some type of specificity, because the damage in some cases is different than someone who may have immigrated here while they may be still considered Black. It's a different dynamic, because even to immigrate here, you have to have a certain amount of resources just to get over. And there's a certain level of resources that one has. I will close by saying this. There's a study called The Color of Law. If you just go, it's done with the Federal Reserve boards around the country. One of them is The Color of Law, Los Angeles. And it shows how many different groups in Los Angeles, breaks them down specifically. And so it shows how, Japanese Americans have the highest amount of wealth in the Los Angeles area, at around like $300,000. Whites are around $200,000. But then you get Nigerian Americans who are around $60,000. Then you keep going down and you find Blacks have less than $600. So it shows how this, once you kind of pull out these different pieces, it allows you to see a larger sense of where we are. Sorry for all that, but I just wanted to.
No. That's what we're here for. Logan, were you gonna, or we can talk?
Yeah, there's a couple questions of like how, and I know we touched on it, like direct cash. One thing again, I try to ground it to make it, or I say realistic or practical. You asked me back when we started, like this building behind me, like that's a $30 million facility that we are currently fundraising to put inside of Riverside neighborhood. It'll be the new Kingswood Community Center, state-of-the-art facilities. We talked about redlining earlier, and Color of Law touches on that as well. There is a map, and I forget the website, that looks at Baltimore in its present day, but also looks at like Baltimore in its past day. And you can see the redlining in the different areas of the city. and where redlining took place, where it's red areas mean there was a lack of investment or disinvestment, green means heavy investment. And then you look at present day where the money is going, and it's those same areas. So that redlining is still taking place, just in a different fashion.
Mhm.
And Wilmington is no different. And look, we call it what it is. I have great relationships with the developers in the city, and it's not about that we don't want investment downtown, because we understand we need to have a viable commercial representation. Like, we are the corporate capital of the world. But what we're saying is we need equitable investment in other neighborhoods. Statistically, the neighborhood of Riverside costs the state of Delaware $15 million annually. Each family, an average size of 3, costs the state of Delaware $52,000 annually when you look at just 3 welfare programs: SNAP, Medicaid, and Purchase of Care. Now, we are investing $1 million every year in a new program called Empower, which stands for Economic Mobility, places ownership within everyone's reach. We are creating a multidisciplinary team to work with each family to invest into the human capital, not just the physical capital with all the homes we'll be building with the new Kingswood, but the human capital to make sure that those families who have been stuck at an average annual income of less than $10,000 have the skill set, the access to the resources that's needed, the know-how to climb that economic ladder to self-sufficiency. Then the community is actually contributing to the economy and not draining it. But let's be clear that this community that has been made vulnerable, and I say that intentionally, not vulnerable community, but community made vulnerable, that was done by decisions by people who don't even look like the people in Riverside. So one thing we're not going to do is talk about, a Riverside community or community similar, that they have put themselves in that position or they don't want a way out of that position. It's that we need to find more creative ways of how we invest in the communities and those communities that haven't been invested in. And that's what we're talking about. So we don't always talk about like the how and the why. We need to come up with this great plan and draw it all out. At the end of the day, it comes down to political will. And we have not seen the political will. Political will is, all right, we got a pandemic going on, and we can get vaccines and we can get testing for absolutely free. That's political will. Political will is the economy shutting down and we're going to bail out corporations. Like, that's political will. When we have that same amount of energy and fortitude for communities that have been oppressed for hundreds of years, we actually might see this country begin to turn around for all people, including people that don't look like us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's enough for me on that right now.
No. I think that's pretty, that's awesome, Logan. So this is a one-off. Before we talk about who might pay for them, do you think that this is something that should be decided by and organized completely by Black Americans? Like if we were to put a commission together, does the white man belong in that commission?
Go ahead, Javon, because I see you went, you want to say something. Go ahead. I'm gonna shut up.
I actually was working out my technology issues over here.
Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that meant you wanted to say something. So I was like, shut up.
It's okay. I'll speak to some things around what Becca's saying. So I think that it is important for the Black community or organizations that have historically worked on these issues to be a part of the conversation. And I say that because it's like we're in this conversation right now talking about what qualifies as reparations, what's going to make people feel whole, like how do you even quantify that? And I like to think about, I can't remember the commission, it was around Native Americans. And if Native Americans could show proof that they owned land, the government would give them money as a form of reparations. But some groups are like, we want our land. We don't want money, we want our land. So it's like, what is, what would Black people or each individual community like to see as a part of reparations? It might not be exactly what corporate heads or government officials might think, because they're not the ones who are impacted. And then when it comes to who might pay for them, it depends. I think in some senses, we're talking about the government paying reparations. But can corporations be a part of this process? in paying for how they have benefited from slavery or have owned slaves. So that is, my thoughts on that.
So those are a couple. I was jotting notes down. You're making some good points. So I think a couple things. One is when we speak about reparations, for me, the initial entity for making payments is our federal government. I think that is by far. I mean, slavery was legal, right? 3/5, blacks were 3/5 or considered 3/5 of a human being. This was an economy that was huge. I don't think people recognize, even if you look back, there's a book by Edward Baptiste, The Half Never Told, I believe. I'm trying to, Half Never Told. One of the lines in there, it talks about how in 1865, the wealthiest the wealthiest state in our country at the time, by far, was Mississippi, right? And as crazy as that is, it was Mississippi. But why? It's because of slavery, right? There was a major economy. The top 7 wealthiest states were all southern states. I believe there may have been one that was a northern state at the time. It was by far, hands down, 1865. This is, and you could even go a little earlier in the 1850s. Cotton, which was the means for all of this, was by far the biggest thing, because not only was it supplying our northern states, because people would use the garments and materials made from cotton, but also it was going over to London and Paris and so on and so forth. So it was so I think that we have so I think that, going back to what Javon said, there is an aspect of the institution of, there's institutions that took advantage of this, right? There's institutions that were, slaves were actually insured during some of these moments in our history, right? So there's an insurance industry around it. There's speculating industry, financing industry around this. So this is a far bigger scope. And so I think it's so broad. I think that it has to fall back onto the federal government. Now, maybe these companies, one can, have these conversations with in regards to these companies as well. But it's the aspect of the idea of slavery, but it's also the idea of what then happens after that continues to deteriorate the wealth within the Black community. So I'll even give, Mercer Bardarn, professor from UC Irvine, who has a great book called The Color of Money. One of the things that she brings up is you actually have, at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, you actually had I think it was January 2nd, 1863, Blacks had 0.5% of the wealth within our country. We fast forwarded to today, we're under 3% of the wealth of this country. So you're going from 1860s to 2020, 2021, and you're less than 3%. And so for me, it's not a aspect of just, business, but it's the fact of this is all being undergirded, and this is being stripped away by our federal government. I'll close with this one thing, and just showing how important the federal government plays in this. Done a lot of dates, I'm hoping I'm right. 1862, I believe, was the Homestead Act. Lincoln comes out with the Homestead Act in 1862. The Homestead Act was an opportunity for people to move west and to be able to get, if you move west, you get land. And this kind of goes into the claim that many of my Native American brothers and sisters will have, right? So so many Americans, they move out west of the Mississippi. They move out west in these areas, and you're able to ascertain land, you grow, you live, so on and so forth. You had in the Homestead Act actually morphed into a variety of different things, right? So it was like the Nebraska Act and all these different things that still gave land to farmers. The reason why I bring that up is, as it continued to roll for another 60, 70 years, you had arguably around 1.4 million 1.4 million white men and women that were able to take advantage of that. Only less than 4,000 Blacks. So to this day, there's actually studies that show that approximately a quarter of all Americans, think about this, a quarter of all Americans can trace their wealth back to the Homestead Act. So when we talk about how wealth has been stripped away, you can see how ways such as this, as Logan talked about, how housing, FHA played a role, and also how aspects of other legislation, even during the New Deal, for some of my progressive brothers and sisters, stripped away from wealth within the Black community. And so I think that we need to truly understand how it's the federal government, how they allowed this, how they supported this, and how if we're going to have any recompense, it needs to be, the case needs to be taken there.
You didn't answer the one question, but I already know what your answer is, but tell the people who decides, who's making these decisions. I asked, should it be the Black community?
It should. I think it should be. I think it should be the Black community. I think there's going to be supporters needed, right? So one of the things that I do like is the fact that, you know, the Asian Americans, there's a specific coalition of Asian Americans that Japanese Americans in particular, they have put letters in support of HR 40, right, which is the House bill for commission and study and reparations. And so there's a lot of support, because here's the other thing that most people don't know: the Congressional Black Caucus, or the Black Caucus at the time, was actually helpful to many of the Japanese Americans in getting reparations for the internment around in the 1940s. Why? Because they recognized that if they can get it, maybe we can get it. But also it was the proper thing, right thing to do. So I think it needs to be led, but also led by obviously Black Americans, academics, scholars, things of that nature, economists. It's going to take a wide array of individuals, people who work on the ground in community, nonprofit organizations. It's going to take a wide array of individuals, but also recognizing that is the Black community is only 13% of our country's population. So I think it will be very important to have people, because you have to create allies, right? In order to get things passed. And so we will need a large group of allies all around the board.
Yeah, and I think that that to me is the point that Logan was making, is political will. And I was thinking more of who's on the commission. And so I'll let this go to Logan, but to your point, allies, obviously they need to exist. I just don't know if they need to tell people how it should look. But that again,
Agreed. Absolutely.
Javon came off mute, and I know she hasn't had the opportunity to speak for a while, so I'll defer.
I'm sorry, Javon. I'm sorry.
Logan, thank you. So I just wanted to add, yes, the federal government, should own up for the injustice, but that should not stop municipalities from looking into what they can do to kind of balance the impact of slavery. And even there's this argument in the community about descendants of slavery versus Black people who might not be able to trace their lineage. But when we talk about the descendants of slavery, do we really need a reason to provide reparations outside of the fact that they were enslaved, and that's the injustice, right? So the wealth gap was a result of it, but the government should be paying its debt due to the act of slavery alone, outside of what resulted afterwards for descendants of slavery.
I mean, and I just want to keep navigating us the yes and not focusing just on slavery. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and you think about the advancements in the medical world that this country has benefited from, what has been done to Black people. I mean, obviously a lot of people are talking about Tuskegee, but when you look at gynecology and how Black women were experimented on without drugs, without sedatives, and just discarded, and the quote unquote godfather of gynecology did all of the experiments on Black women so it could be advanced and then used for white women, who then got drugs to be able to go through those surgeries. I mean, and there's tons of examples. So I really want to caution us of not focusing on the slavery, because I think that's a cop-out. And I mean, we're in 2021 and Black people are still facing great oppression, and the ripple effect, the cascading of the oppression over the 400 years. So that's why I say, if you're growing up Black in America, if you're existing and living and working and breathing Black in America, you're still facing oppression, whether it's from the, what we saw with George Floyd and the multiple things that happen in police. Like, I don't think we can just look like it's a monolithic experience and, it's slavery or it's this or that. It's just a combination of things. But, I really would like, and I'm not the host, but I think a lot of the questions that we're getting now in the chat or whatever is, we know the problems. It's like, how do we solve it? Who solves it? And I caution also all of us, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, we want to come up with this great plan and build it all. No, like, vaccines isn't going through without hiccups, but it needs to be done, and there's urgency. We need to have that same urgency with Black communities and Black people in this country. Like, put some money behind it, pick some people to help lead it, get some coalitions together and start putting out the money. Like, it doesn't have to be that scientific, and we want it to be scientific to justify it when the justification has been for over 400 years. Like, let's be real. And that's what I talk about political will.
No,
Yeah, Serena Williams 2 years ago almost died.
It's still happening. No, I think, Logan, to your point, you're kind of dead on there, because when people have always said to me, I know more about reparations than I used to, but I'd always say, yeah, but I don't know what it would look like, right? But that's not a reason to say no, right? So just because I don't know what it would look like doesn't mean it shouldn't start happening and may continue for, we have to think how many, what does it look like? A lower interest rate plus a payout plus investment in the communities.
Give me $50 million. Give me $50 million. No, I'm serious.
Yes.
Like, right now, I'm leading a $250 million project. And it's, the amount of creativity, complexity to get the funding and to build the housing, the new Kingswood, the amount of meetings I need to have with corporate CEOs and fundraising and all of this. Like, if that 250, just give me 30 million to build new Kingswood. I'm telling you right now, watch what we do and watch the turnaround of the Riverside neighborhood. And we're working under a model that has already been proven. The Eastlake neighborhood out of Atlanta, Georgia, like, we're one of 28 purpose-built communities in the country. Matter of fact, give $500 million, federal go $500 million of purpose-built, divvy it out evenly to all the communities and watch what happens. There's only 800 or so communities like this in the country. This is a solvable problem. It's not as difficult as we want to make it seem. People, let's be for real.
But let me add there. And I think you're hitting on, you're hitting on a point. I think what we also have
Eugene and I, and I'm gonna interrupt you because I'm actually going to give you another segue. So Eugene and I started a nonprofit when we were 23. And we always said that Eugene was a legislative branch and I was the executive branch. Eugene will go through and get the policy and I'll make sure we carry it out. So I'm gonna throw it back to you because I know where you're going with it.
No, I maybe, but here's one direction. One thing I will bring up. When you have, and that kind of maybe going with what you're saying. So when you have, I look at it from the standpoint of, if we're able, like, let's look at the wealth gap that we have, right? So the median wealth of your white family is around 140,000 minus the family car. Median wealth of your Black family is around, once you take out depreciated assets, is around $1,400. So $1,400 to $144,000, right? If we're able, one of the things that I like us to think about is, imagine if just there was reparations that put the median wealth on par, right? So now, because one of the problems is that, and this goes to Logan specifically, like, from our backgrounds, we ran a nonprofit. We went broke, like flat broke, no money for gas, the whole nine, trying to help our kids that weren't ours, right? And if still broke, there you go. If the wealth proposition was our median wealth in the Black community was equal to our contemporaries, our white brothers and sisters, that would mean that it would raise the floor up. So now, if we would be in a position where we could say, you know, we're going to start this nonprofit and we can do it with our own money, so on and so forth, right? He wouldn't have to work selling books on the side. I wouldn't have to work at a hotel from 10 at night to 7 in the morning. Like, it would provide the opportunity. And it goes also to us currently right now. One of the, if imagine how easy it would be to do work over at Reach do work over at Reach and to be able to get people to fund Reach or many of these other entities, if the median wealth is for Black people, is $100,000 higher, because then you can afford to have someone say, you know what, I'm going to give you 20,000, 30,000, so on and so forth. Because I think that's a major part that we have to think about. Like, so when we talk about Black wealth, it's the fact that and I think oftentimes we get as I'm just saying in general, not even Black people, just in general, oftentimes people will say, man, LeBron's got money, right? Or Jay-Z's got money, right? But they're so far, they're so much down the road of anomalies, right? The top, in the Black community, our top 5%, the wealthiest people within the Black community are baby boomers, right? And most of this is this kind of sad part of the future if we don't do anything. The sad part is most of baby boomers' resources are tied up in two areas. One is housing and the other is pensions. So once they die, it's not like my father passed away 3 years ago. He had a pension. He had 2 pensions, right? I didn't get his pension when he passed away, and neither will any other brothers and sisters that are out here whose parents may have a pension, because that's what's holding up, and unfortunately, that's what's holding up a lot of millennials and Gen Zers is they're latched and attached to baby boomers who have additional amount of resources that they're able to expend and give. And so we have to think, so when we think about what does this look like in its totality, I agree with both Javon and Logan. It has to be encompassing of the institution side, and it has to be direct side. It has to be like individualized. I think it's a both and rather than that either or.
Yeah,
and the other question is,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The other, just to bring it up, is interesting. This conversation showing some different point of views, like trying to reach the same goal, and this is why there are bodies right now that are doing this research, because like we're Black or African American citizens and have different ideas or may not know exactly what it looks like. But another question is, what is enough to kind of redress those past injustices? And some, folks really wonder if money will resolve the root causes or problems of racism, or, will it resolve the laws and institutions that perpetuate inequality? But like Logan said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's something that we have to do, and we have to try, and we shouldn't prohibit reparations simply because it seems difficult to implement. Or some folks will say it happened 150 or so years ago, and I wasn't alive to be involved in slavery. Why am I doing this now? But it's something that we have to try. And the US has a history of actually doing this for other groups. So I'll leave it with it.
Not a great history, but yes, we have done it. And it's interesting because this conversation wasn't about should we or should we not have reparations. This conversation is about how we do that, how we get there. And I think before we take questions, a lot of people said some great stuff in the chat. But I think exactly to the point Javon just made is there's a lot of different opinions, right, about what that would look like. But I think the most important thing is that it starts, right? Like it starts somewhere, and it may never end somewhere. And I only say that in the aspect is like it took us this long to get here, and we've gone backwards and forwards like a sliding scale for years. So how do we actually really move that all the way up? Like it can't, we can't just bump it like a bumper car, right? It's got to get bumped and then bumped and bumped and bumped and bumped to 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 become equal to the historical wealth that is in existence in the country. So I don't know if anyone had any questions, but we were going to open it up to some questions. So someone did ask, speak to how access to voting is also tied to reparations. So all three of you probably can answer that one in some way in what you do for a living. So anybody want to talk about voting and reparations?
I'm probably the least versed in this, so I'll defer to Eugene and Javon on this one.
Javon, did you have something? Were you about to say something? Okay. So I think it is, when we talk about voting, I think that's and it actually goes back to something that Javon said earlier. It goes into how many people have been disadvantaged because of the fact that they may have a criminal background, and that they cannot vote. And so it's also tied, and it's, the sad part is in many cases it's tied to one's wealth status. So you think about the bail reform efforts and other aspects of reform around criminal justice reform, there's like a direct correlation between one's financial wealth position and also the being able to avoid being in the criminal justice system. And so I think it's directly interlinked, and that goes back to even when convict leasing, right, which happened after slavery, where if someone could make up some reason to arrest you and then make you have to work to pay it off, right? And so I think that is very much tied to the voting, almost every aspect, whether it's voting, education, criminal justice reform, housing, it's all kind of built, because in our society, everything based upon one's wealth, and what they have or do not have in order to kind of navigate. And so I think that's kind of the lens that I look at it.
Okay. Someone asked, and I think it's HR 40, because I just got corrected earlier, what the status is of HR 40. I think it's in limbo, but if somebody knows anything different, please share. I think it's just sitting there in the House.
Yeah, it was just introduced in the House in 2019.
Just.
So it's 2020, 2021 at this point. And so if there's going to be a reintroduction, we will, see about that.
Yeah, I'll just add on and just say, there's a companion bill in the Senate. I think that was pushed in recently. That was by Senator Booker. Senator Booker pushed the companion bill in the Senate, and I believe also Senator Coons has signed on to the bill. And I know that HR 40, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester has signed on too. And they've picked up a great deal of sponsors. It's normally HR 40 is a little bit different now, and going back to what Javon said, because it's used to be with Representative Conyers, but when he passed away, I believe Sheila Jackson Lee picked it up, and she's been introducing it over the last couple of years. It's been like her bill.
Real quick, Eugene, I could do it, but I think you do a better job. Can you explain what that is? Because there may be people listening that don't know what HR 40 is or what we're talking about.
So HR 40 is just in regards to a study around reparations. It doesn't mean that it has to be reparations. It kind of talks about some of the same questions that we're discussing right now, like what does it look like? Who is able to benefit from reparations? It's having those kind of conversations. So that's kind of where it's at. It's more of like a bill to study reparations. Currently, there's, I think Mr. Bunkley, good man he is, he put in there that in Evanston, Illinois, some states are working on things. So California has some things going on. Illinois, in Evanston, I believe it's Evanston, Illinois. There is some, I think there's also something in North Carolina as well that's been kind of brought up. But
Asheville, that's what I was speaking about earlier.
Nashville as well. So there's, and even in here, our Wilmington City Council passed a bill last session to, I believe, study the impacts around what that would be for this within the city of Wilmington. So I think that was brought up, but many of these states and cities and municipalities are bringing this up, not necessarily for, while there are interested in regards to reparations for with their specific community, but like many things, you know, change has to come to Washington. So it's just kind of building the case with many of these different states, bringing that forward to the federal government.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to correct that HR 40 was introduced this session. It was introduced in January of 2021.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe it needed to be reintroduced, I think, because of losing Senator Lewis. Okay, so somebody asked in the chat, what is a good book that a white person could read that could explain this to them, that they could explain this to other white people? So what is a good book on reparations?
Well, I would say Eugene then quoted about 22 books.
I wasn't going to say
the recording is out there, folks. If you weren't jotting them down, he didn't.
I'm sorry.
Color of Law, Color of Money.
Yeah. And both of those I have. But
yes.
Those are good.
Yeah. But you also mentioned one about, is it the Black Case for Reparations or?
So there's a couple, and I'm sorry, like if I'm throwing all these books out, like this has been like something I've been really into, as you can tell, over the last couple of years. So as Logan said, The Color of Money by Mircea Baradaran, professor at UC Irvine, law professor. Color of Law by Rothstein, Columbia professor. There's a new book out by Dr. Sandy Darity and his wife, Kirsten Mullen, which is From Here to Equality. And that's will come out within the last, I would say, 6 months. If there's a good book by Ira Katz Nelson. I think when you talk about what allies should read, I think it's Ira Katz Nelson's from When Affirmative Action Was White. He's a professor at Columbia, but he has 2 books. One is When Affirmative Action Was White, which is smaller, and then he has another one called Fear Itself, where he talks about the New Deal, and he talks about some of the issues around that time. And I'm just thinking, I'll put them in the chat as I'll put a list of some books I've read in the chat. I'm sorry.
If you also want to send it to me, I can put it in everyone's email for tomorrow too. So
Sure.
Either way, I put a couple in there. So all right. Yes, thank you. And let me see here. Carl, and I don't think we talked about a figure, Carl. I think Carl asked, was there an amount of compensation? And real quick, because I gotta ask Miss Beebe's question because she's just one of my sheroes. What is your thinking about the fact that history does not archive Black Americans as part of this country's founding and building, etc.? Should the historical correctness and truth be part of reparation mandate?
Absolutely. And in our school and education system, I think it was a school district in New Jersey that just made it mandatory that Black history is a part of history. When you look at what we talked about earlier, not just slavery, but the medical advancements, the inventions that Black people have contributed to this society, the level of oppression, like the Black history is a part of this history, Black history building this country, allowing it to flourish and be all that it is, although not experiencing the benefits from it. So yes, it is history. It's embedded in our history, and everyone needs to learn about it. These aren't just Black experiences. The Black experience is a part of everyone's experience. So I couldn't agree more. And I would never disagree with Ms. Beebe.
Got that right.
I'm not sure anyone would. So yes, to your point, Ms. Beebe, I think we all agree that it should definitely be in the history books, in the everyday history books that we read in our school.
Shout out to Ms. Beebe for bringing that wisdom to Riverside, the warehouse in Kingswood, not just educating the adults involved, but she's also has offered her time to educate our youth, so they feel empowered, because knowing that your lineage, your ancestors have helped build this country, have built this country, have created things that we all still use. I think that's part of giving us the confidence and faith that we also can be better than what we might see on a daily basis. And that's huge for us.
Yeah, and I mean, it's designed the way it is now, for that not to be seen. So, um, yes, Shannon gave a shout out, or mentioned that Representative Dorsey Walker has a group together, and I sit in on these and just listen to these brilliant young kids about making Black history part of a requirement. And more so when we talked about it and the kids were talking, that it shouldn't just be part of history, right? It's part of literature, it's part of science, right? Like that's part of, we always do use the word history, but we don't implement it in every other subject, which would be really encompassing the whole entire country's history. So, hopefully that'll be what that looks like in the end. But yes, shout out to Representative Dorsey Walker for working on that. Let's see, do we have any other questions? If not, my panelists can, so many possibilities, hard to get agreement on how. What do you each consider to be the best ways to do reparations? Well, I think we talked about that, beyond a national apology, right? And the options are like, who receives them? Definitely difference of opinion there, just a little bit, but I think, everybody who might pay for them, we talked about that.
Hey, just to be provocative, I know there's a big argument right now for student loan forgiveness. Student loan forgiveness only for Black people. Like, let's seriously, because although people may look at me and say, oh, you got this great title and you're making decent money, because we didn't have generational wealth, because I didn't have a 2-parent household income, I was in that window, and I think we're slowly migrating out of that window now, where if you want to make something of yourself, you go to college. All right, I'm going to college. I don't have enough people around me to say, all right, you're going to a college that costs $32,000 a year. Like, okay, how much is that going to cost you when you get out? How much money are you going to need to make when you get out? How much are you going to be paying in interest? So long story short, like there can be creative ways to address this, but at the end of the day, let's get the ball rolling.
Yeah, the largest population, you guys probably already know this, in America are Black women with student debt. And so yeah, people are all on here going, I'm still paying.
Well, I ain't paying for jack. They said that they paused the payments. I'm not paying for anything. I have faith that we're gonna come through, and some of it is going to get forgiven.
But that goes to, that hits the nail on his head. We have right now, there's studies, and that's the truth. Like, and you see how the wealth gap really, how it impacts everything, because the average Black woman that graduates from college has less in wealth than the white male that drops out of high school. Like, and so it shows about what you can, like the opportunities that you have in your future, because while one may have a degree, if you don't have the job that is commensurate with that degree, then you can become, all you are essentially is slave to the debt, where you can't say what you want because you can't get fired, or you can't miss out on a job because you need those payments to pay your student loan, pay your ability to feed yourself, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And that goes into like the larger, going back to what was said earlier, the larger conversation of what it could look like.
Mm-hmm. And racism is still in play. Even when you get a college education, there are gaps in what Black men and women are paid. So it's like you are reaching these milestones that people say will allow you to elevate caste-wise, but there are still barriers there in place.
I got another one. No down payments on a house for a Black person if they've shown 5 years consistent being able to pay rent.
Mhm.
Like I can be here all night doing this. Like it's not that hard, people. Really.
Yeah,
But I think
no, you're right. So
I
there's
agree.
one question in here, because we're almost out of time. I could stay on and do this forever, but I'm sure that you all have things to do. How do you advocate for reparations within your organizations and circles? What will you all do moving forward as leaders coming out of this event, and how can attendees get involved with those efforts? Very good question. Is there something that people on this, I don't know if you guys are personally doing anything for
No,
this. So
I, so as you probably you could tell, like I've been like this is something that I really like. This is work that I really believe in. So I'm even on a personal like so a couple different fronts. The Urban League, one of the things that we've been doing is educating people about these issues. So we had one of the foremost scholar men like 3 years ago, Dr. Derek Hamilton, to talk about reparations. He's one of the leading stratification economists. Also, one of the things that we're going to be doing is doing some work around podcasts and everything, and having some of the same authors that I brought up, having them speak to some of these issues, because a part of it is also getting people. I think a lot of Americans need to know, right? Because a lot of people just don't know, right? They just think, you know, I'm keep it real, black people don't work hard, and because or they don't save money, which is actually the total opposite. We actually study shows socioeconomically, we actually save more than our white counterparts in different class levels. But we need to be able to start demystifying and taking out all these different myths. And then the second thing that we're doing is like it's letting people know about the information, but also meeting with our legislators, supporting them, telling them that this is something that needs to be done. I'll give you, there's a study that shows that in Germany in 1953, when they started issuing reparation payments due to the Holocaust, the German people had an approval rate of reparations of around 11%. We are, as Americans, already at around 20% already. So you can see that we're already moving in the right direction, but we need to make sure more people are educated, and then we need to, and going back to what Logan has said, I totally agree. We need to put pressure and just make it happen, right? And so I think that's the other aspect of it.
yeah, so that's where the political will comes from that Logan keeps talking about. And so, okay, so was there a specific thing? So obviously you mentioned Lisa Blunt Rochester supporting one. You mentioned Senator Coons. Often we call them and tell them what they're not doing, and there's plenty sometimes there. But maybe we call and say, we really support this initiative, and if you're signed on, stay signed on, and if you're not, I'm not sure if Senator Carper is, get signed on. So, I mean, that's a simple thing that I think people always want to do huge things. Political will is a big thing, but it takes massive amounts of people to do that. Eugene, you just mentioned maybe we partner and do some sort of education, because I think to a lot of people's point, educating white people is one of the biggest barriers, I think, to having all of these initiatives move forward, because we've never been taught, we don't know, we don't want to learn, it doesn't affect us, whatever the reason may be. But I think sometimes even having an event like this teaches people something, and maybe we get a big speaker or something. So, but go ahead, you guys all, I'll give you guys all a couple minutes to close up. But thank you, all three of you, for being here tonight. And thank you for the audience participation. You guys have been great. We'll go backwards this time. We'll let Logan close out first.
As you can see, I'm not passionate about this at all. So I'm gonna take a nap after this. No, seriously, no, I thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Becca, thank you for inviting me. Eugene, Javon, always a pleasure. Javon, pleasure to meet you. I put my email in the chat. I run 3 organizations in Riverside, and our collective mission between the 3 organizations is to eliminate the barriers of structural racism by empowering the community to reach its full potential and revolutionizing teen engagement. So, we do this work on a daily basis. And if you really want to get involved, or you're thinking about ways you might be able to contribute, and we're not just always talking about financially, like if you want to be a part of this work, we have more than enough opportunities for you to become engaged. So thank you.
Thank you, Logan. Eugene?
So again, thank you, Becca, Logan, Javon. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and just speak about this important issue. So I would just say two things. One is the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. We are focusing on obviously the reparations, but kind of going back to some of the conversation we had earlier, there are other things that we can work on, right? And so we just created, we have our Building People Power campaign, led by Cheyenne Miller, the star she is. And one of the things that we're focusing on, how do we build people power around some legislation that are impacting our communities today, right? That, and in particular in the Black community, that could be everything from having like mandatory or goals for dollars that the state spends on countless projects, right? You go to Maryland, there's a 15% mandatory like guideline that they're fighting for, that they've had in place for a while, but it's not happenstance that in Maryland, Logan and I both went to school down there, you have so many strong, affluent Black communities because they were able to take advantage of dollars through their state and also through the federal government through contracting, right? And this also is in Massachusetts as well. There's other projects around women's health, all these different issues that are so important. So one is you can help us with this process. Come get involved with Urban League. I'll put my information in the chat. Then the second thing I would say is this: we cannot wait on none of this. Like we're in dire times, and I cannot stress it enough. We are in dire times. COVID-19 has destroyed many of our businesses. You're looking at around 50% of Black businesses are gone and not coming back, right? We have people who are starving to eat. So it's imperative that we call upon more from our legislators, our elected officials, to recognize what's going on within our communities. And so important that we fight around reparations, because if we don't do this, that number that I gave of 2053 that was given in 2017, that will come far sooner than 2053. It could be the next 10, 15 years. And if we're not focused on these issues. So I can't thank you all enough. I really appreciate everyone, and I wish everyone a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you. And Javon, before you go, I want to say thank you to the ACLU of Delaware for being our partner on this one. Really appreciate it. You guys always step up, actually all of your organizations do. So it's really good to have these important conversations. So thank you, and go ahead, Javon.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Logan and Eugene, for being such great panelists tonight, and very thoughtful conversation. So the ACLU National is in support of HR 40 and in support of making reparations real, right? Reparations is an economic justice issue, but it's also a racial justice issue to repair this legacy of unjust actions towards and just human rights issues, really, towards Black people here in this country. And for the ACLU of Delaware, I know that we have been having some conversations around reparations, as well as the legislation, or I think it was a bill or a resolution from Wilmington that was passed last year, and seeing that becomes a reality here in Delaware. So thank you so much. And Becca, I'm sure that you'll send out emails after this. And if anyone has any additional questions or conversation, please feel free to reach out.
Yep, I will. And I'll send you guys all an email tomorrow, everyone that registered and attended. And this will actually be available online, whether it be our YouTube or Facebook. I don't know which button I pushed, but it'll be out there. And I'll put that in the link too, if you want to share this conversation with your friends. So maybe you don't necessarily need to have those conversations. You say, here, listen to these great leaders in our community talk about it. So thank you guys. Good night.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Have a wonderful night. Thanks again.